Good evening, and welcome to part 2 in our conversation series in response to the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and to the legal systems that protected his killers and silenced their crime. This is Reverend Patrick Heery coming to you live in Auburn, New York, through Auburn Public Theater and the Harriet Tubman Troupe. I'll be your facilitator this evening. On February 23rd, 2 white men chased, shot, and killed Ahmaud Arbery while he was jogging. The violence that found Ahmaud on that road exactly 3 months ago today, the injustice that led to no arrests until 2 months later, and this is really important, this is going to be one of our main themes tonight. They are not exceptional. They are everyday. We're going to hear some of those stories tonight. They are every time a person of color is followed in a store, every time a white person walks to the other side of the road, every time Black is coded as scary or criminal, every time districts are gerrymandered to deplete voting power, every time houses and neighborhoods are shown only to some people, every time white protesters shaking guns in the faces of police are met with calm understanding, while unarmed, peaceful protesters and just people of color living their lives are met with state-enforced violence. Every time white liberals speak for people of color and demand they lead. Every time a child of color isn't called on in class, every time a child of color cannot see themselves in their teachers or their school books, every time. The violence of white supremacy that we're here to talk about tonight, it's every moment our world seeks to render invisible, to dehumanize, to target and silence a person of color. Last week, we heard from white men because it's our job and should be our passion to heal this. This week, we hear from Black men. Next week, same time, same place, we will bring the two groups together. Tonight, our guests will speak their stories, their analysis, their truth. They are businessmen, correctional officers, political strategists, and artists. 2 come from Auburn, 2 come from New York City. They make this a national, global conversation. And I hope that they share with you some of what they discussed in our rehearsal last night, because their words were real and vulnerable and powerful. We are very fortunate to be with these 4 men tonight and to be witness to them and their brilliance and their stories. It is, and this is something we talked about last night, it is a sacred thing, a holy thing, to let our guards down and see one another. I mean, really see one another, to see the truth of another human being. That's why we are here tonight, to see the truth of these 4 men, these 4 vessels of divinity, and to see the systemic truths they point to. So at this time, because we're not here to hear me talk, I want to welcome our 4 guests tonight. Tracy McLeod, Brian Muldrow, Luther Isler, and Abe Gatling. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. It is an honor to be with you tonight, and we are grateful for you sharing your time and your stories with us this evening. And first, I want those who are watching to be able to know who you are. And if you are watching, on Facebook. I do encourage you to post comments, post questions. Those will be communicated to me, and if we have time, we'll integrate those into our conversation tonight or possibly into subsequent conversations. So Abe, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and tell us also about your motivation for participating in this conversation tonight? Why are you here?
Yeah, hey, I'm Abe Gatling, 28-year-old, living in New York City. I'm currently working from home, but I am a stand-up comedian. I make jokes for money. That's my job. And I think, I don't know, the reason I was asked here by my mom, Melody Smith Johnson. I'm one of the curators for this discussion, and she asked me to speak on, yet another instance of white supremacy, an unnecessary death of Black life, and I think everybody on this panel thinks it's necessary to talk about it, although it is exhausting to have to keep talking about it. But here we are. So,
thank you, Abe. Brian, could you introduce yourself and tell us what brings you here tonight?
My name is Brian Muldrow. I've lived in Auburn, New York all my life. I own a company called the Muldrow Group. I sit on the board of the NAACP, Booker T. Washington, and I'm founder of the Minority Professional Association. Well, the conversation just needs to be had, and I think that engaging white men in these two separate conversations and bringing us together is something that needs to be had. And I think that together we all can at least heal each other by seeing each other's point of views.
Thank you, Brian. Luther, could you introduce yourself and tell us what brings you here tonight?
Sure. So, Luther D. Isler. I'm a communications coordinator for State Senator Brian Benjamin in Harlem, New York City. And I'm also a curator of a open mic and spoken word program called the Harlem Bomb Shelter. So I guess what brings me here is, I've from multiple facets have participated in these type of conversations in a particular way within, the same groups of like-minded people. I really appreciated this opportunity to have a platform where a multitude of different perspectives get to hear this conversation, especially amongst Black men. This is a conversation we have amongst ourselves, but not so much with the rest of the world. And it's important that the rest of the world hears this conversation and hear what we have to say so that we can all be on the same page, hopefully.
Thank you, Luther. And finally, Tracy, could you please introduce yourself and tell us your motivations for being here tonight?
My name is Tracy McLeod. I'm a correction officer, 35 years, the father of three grandsons. I'm with Abe. I'm tired of having this conversation, but I know it's important to have the conversation. Every time these incidences happen, we have the conversation. We see the injustices going on all around the world, and we are just looking at this like, when is white society going to step up and say enough is enough?
Thank you, Tracy. And now I'm hoping the four of you can have a conversation. So I'm going to offer some questions, but please, each of you dive in when you're ready and respond to one another. And then when I sense we're ready, we'll move on to the next question. But this is your time now to speak whatever truth you need to share. So first, and I will tell our audience tonight that these questions that we're going to be asking are, with some adaptation, the same questions that we asked our panel last week as well. So describe a moment in your life when you realize that these conversations, like the conversation we're having tonight, like the one that happened last week, a moment when you realize that such conversations are pivotal to healing.
I'll tell you, I think and this is going to go a little left, but when the Kaepernick kneeling situation happened, and minorities and women have protested several different ways. And I think the conversation that struck me the most was they weren't hearing why we were kneeling. When you've ever protested, there's always been a pushback from the other side. The other side has said, well, we don't agree with that. We don't think we're ready for integration. We think that you are, wrong in your views. But what happened in this case is they made it about the flag, and we were trying to just tell them why. And, that to me was when the conversation became a distraction, because every single time we tell you how we're hurt and how we want to protest, the oppressor is telling us how to protest. And that to me is kind of, that was the time where I thought we need to have a conversation, because at least you can know why we're fighting and what we're fighting for.
For me, it was when I was in school, and I realized that we were being treated differently as far as education is concerned, as far as being punished for behavior that our white counterparts were doing the same thing, but we were the ones getting kicked out of school for it. And I couldn't understand why I am doing the same thing that they're doing, and I'm getting kicked out of school or reprimanded for it. And they're not. I knew that conversation needed to be had then and there.
At my my open mic, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, a lot of people would come and perform pieces inspired by the incident, but I feel like incident is a mild choice of words. But and as the curator of the space who's there regularly, I hate to say, but it becomes heavy. So when that time frame passed, when people stopped, speaking about Trayvon Martin and their pieces, it was kind of this nice break. And then Mike Brown was murdered. And then once again, it's this great insurgence of this space and these pieces and expressing just the pain that everyone is going through. And it kind of hits like, there's not going to be a this is it. There's not, that moment, why did I get comfortable that we stopped talking about Trayvon Martin? Because we're just waiting for the next pain to hit us. So that's kind of when we for us, we kind of was proactive, and we started creating material out of that. And I guess myself, I started doing that as well, because it's not stopping. It's not going to stop. We can catch the breath if we want, but we need to kind of we live in a society where we just got to brace for the next hit.
Yeah, and I think to dovetail off of Luther, I guess I'm coming up a little empty on pinpointing exact moment when it's not like, the world was one way and then something happened and everybody realized we need to start talking about this. Like, this has always been a conversation that's been had, that's needed to be had. I think the medium we're using right now is hopefully going to impact the people who need to be having the conversations that aren't. Luther was talking about just death after death after death. And then there's like a 3-week period where everyone's up in arms and we need to mobilize and we need to, all become activists. And then life goes on and we all forget and it comes out of the media cycle and then it happens again. So then there's this re-excitement of like, oh, now we need to organize for but then it dies down and it keeps happening over, and it's been happening. So I can't describe an exact moment, but it's more important than it has ever been with each new murder. So every single time this happens, and every single time it has happened, I think are pivotal moments that cause this conversation, that necessitate this conversation.
Thank you, Abe. And I really appreciate how the four of you pinpoint the sort of catch-22, where several of you have used that word exhausting, that the conversation itself that we're having now, that we're having to have again and again, is exhausting. but then we have to have the conversation because of the exhaustion of facing yet another death, yet another injustice, and yet another conversation that doesn't go anywhere. And that's the danger, of course, of these conversations, especially for white folks, is that it becomes a cathartic moment for white people, and then we move on. So I thank you for your answers. And now let's turn to Ahmaud. So when you first heard or saw of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, what was your reaction?
That's the funny thing. Because, to my other point, when I first heard about Ahmaud, I did not even react. Because at this point it's Tuesday. A black man got killed. It's Tuesday. I was writing a poem and I had to do a little bit of research. There was a woman, Breonna Taylor, in Kentucky, who was killed in her sleep because of a raid on the wrong apartment. And that didn't even really hit the news cycle. She was an EMT. What hit the news cycle right after that was Ahmaud. So it's like, this is just so every day. I'm tired of being angry, so I don't watch these things because I already know what it is. So all I'm gonna do is just be mad again. Do I really want to do that to my emotions? But of course, it's just responsible to, be up to date and aware. But it just became a moment where I'm like, I don't feel like being angry again right now.
I was devastated when I heard about that. Here it is, Trayvon Martin, and then Miss Taylor there. And by the way, her boyfriend was charged with attempted murder for trying to protect his home.
Right.
So let's not forget that part of the story as well. But we don't have that right to do that. They tell us we don't have that right to protect our own homes when everybody has that right when it comes to us. You know what I mean? It's just not fair. But I was devastated when I heard about it because I have sons, I have grandsons, and I have to prepare them every day before they leave. And I pray every day before I leave for work for their safety, every single day as a parent, because I know that that's a possibility, because he is basically like my son, because that could happen to my son.
Yeah, I guess like Luther, when I first heard about the shooting, it was like anything. It was like just another piece of news to me, because the instances this keeps it's numbing. It's a numbing. I've become numb to seeing people who look like me get murdered by the police, or people who just feel like they get to murder us. And I think it comes from a place of survival, you know what I mean? Like in terms of like protecting myself from getting re-traumatized every single time. And I don't think that's a good thing. I do think it's just a necessary coping mechanism I've developed to stay sane. And it's unfortunate because this is a tragedy and it's every single time, but just the way I reacted was like, yeah, it's Tuesday. That's another thing that happened. But I think it's self-protective. It's not because we don't care. It's because we don't want to be running around like crazy people. We have lives to live. And maybe on some, selfish level, if I can insulate myself from the horrors that reaffirm that I'm not like safe, that I'm not allowed to be a person, then it makes it a little bit easier. But that's what we have to do. I don't know. People cope in different ways, but I was numb to it.
Yeah. I agree with both of them. It was a numbing experience seeing it, and it's like one after another. And it's hard to have the conversation at this point. It's not, because it's so painful, and you don't even know what your impact's going to be. It's just when you see somebody getting murdered, is not you put yourself in their shoes. I could have been jogging on that street. I could have had a hoodie on. I could have been in this situation. So the defense mechanism is to act like you didn't see it at all, and that's the scary part. and act like, and so I agree with both of those guys and those feelings. And I just learned something that I didn't know what I was doing until I heard those gentlemen just speak. So there was a learning experience, because that's something that I just, you know, I don't know, it's rough.
What was painful to watch was the fact that this young man was hunted. He was hunted down and shot in broad daylight just because he was jogging down the street. I mean, we live in America, and we are Americans, and we should never fear going anywhere. My wife ran for political office. I didn't go knock on a door, me or my son, because we knew the possibility of something happening to us could be great. And imagine that in America, that we as Black people still have to be cautious of where we walk. My grandkids have to be cautious of where they walk. And that shouldn't be, because we live here too.
No, absolutely. I work in politics, so of course we do like door knocks and stuff. But when I go upstate, I will never forget. I didn't have a bad situation, but the fact that the environment made my brain say, "Oh wait, it was winter," and I felt necessary to take my hood off while doing these door knocks. Anyone else in the neighborhood would probably have their hood on, but I felt that I had to bear the code, because if I was too intimidating on these door knocks, then I might die. And keep in mind that these murderers of Ahmaud didn't get arrested for what, like 2 months, right?
Yes.
So I think the worst part is not even about the fear of being killed, but the idea that it's permitted.
That's a powerful note to move to our next question, Luther, and all of you. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty and powerful words. So, talking about conversations, there has been much said about the conversation that Black parents have with their children to prepare them for the reality that all four of you have described, to prepare them for police interactions and navigating the community, to try to keep them safe, as well as break their heart to the reality of a world that doesn't love and respect and protect them in the way that they deserve. Did you have this conversation? What was said? What did you feel?
I have the conversation with my sons all the time, and my daughter, especially when I first taught them to drive and they were going out for the first time on their own. And my thing was with them was, if you ever get pulled over by the police, keep your hands on the wheel, all right? Don't move until unless you ask that officer permission to move to get your necessary papers to show him. And then you tell him that I am now reaching in my glove compartment to get my papers to hand them to you. Is that all right? This is what we have to do. All right, we don't make no sudden movements. You know what I mean? So when they're out, my heart drops until they get back.
I have 2 daughters. One's 10 and one's 6. I actually had a with their mother when they were younger. We had a conversation. I had made a statement about at least we have girls. I'll be scared of raising a Black son. And then she was like, no, because we are getting killed too.
Yep.
So pretty much from the age of like 3, I taught my girls the song Straight and Fruit, and kind of explained the history of our relationships with certain white people in America. I'm in the arts, so I'm always, like I said, I'm writing stuff. So I recently wrote a piece where I listed maybe like 16 people who were killed, and I really just went through the list with my daughters and explained the situation. I try to paint it as not an all white people thing, but there's evil white people thing. And not to ever necessarily feel safe that you know which one from which, especially when it comes to the police. Just because that's the perpetrators that we're looking at when I'm talking about, you know, this list. So it's kind of just a thing. The good thing is, you know, there's other, you know, white people in our lives. So my kids joke that we don't call them white, we call them pale, because they've just the way that I've conversed with them, they consider white is a bad thing, right? So no, we like those people, so they're pale. They're not the white people you talked about. But the list is ridiculous. I mean, even on a note about writing the song, I said it was 16. When I first wrote it, I had a list of like maybe 12 just to fit in a particular format of the piece. It took a week for a partner of mine to do their part. By the time we got back, there was Charleston murder. It was Tatiana Jefferson got murdered, and I was like, that's crazy. I took a week to finish writing the song, and it was, you know, 2 more situations, you know. So it's just a kind of integrated conversation, as this is what life is. You know, you tie your shoes, you do your ABCs. Some white people are gonna kill you. Make sure you eat breakfast. You know, that's just part of you know, growing up Black.
And I think, I mean, in terms of like when I had the conversation very early, you know, it's just maybe out of anxiety or stress, my mom sat me down and was like, they are killing you. It's not, you have to present yourself as non-threatening as possible. And because you never know, like, because you can't tell the difference between white people and quote unquote pale people, you know what I mean? And it's so that, and I think that kind of like life-saving anxiety gets baked into our everyday functioning. You know what I mean? Like that is just something we have to carry around with us, and that also kills us a lot slower than a bullet. But walking around with that stress, with that pain, with that anxiety kills us. I'm gonna be I don't want to sound like a pretentious jerk here, but Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about the bloody heirloom, and how there's this privilege that gets passed down, and in a weird twisted way, that is our heirloom, the responsibility to teach the generations after us how to live in a world that doesn't care if we live or die, and that teaching us that anxiety, teaching us to live with that. Yeah, it's a weird, like, cosmic radiation in the background of how we live our lives, and I think it's necessary to talk about how that's also killing us.
Yes.
You're right about that anxiety. You know, it occurred to me almost even only just a couple of years ago. You know, growing up, I always was like, I want a job where I wear a suit. I want a job where I wear a suit. And since working in government, except for certain events, my white counterparts aren't always wearing suits, right? But I feel the only way I look like I work for a state governor is if I wear my suit. You know, I can't just wear my hoodie like the next guy, because he looks like he went to Harvard and I look like, you know, I'm from the hood, you know?
You know, Abe, you're right about that stress that we tend to feel. It's just like when you're driving down the street and you look in your rear view mirror and you see a police car, and all of a sudden you're figuring out, okay, did I put my blinker on? You know, is everything in order here? Because, you know, it's just that thing that pops up. And then when he leaves, everything subsides. And we don't even think about it. It's just a natural response that we have.
Brian, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I do. You know, it's a tough conversation to have, because you know, kids grow up like every other kid, wanting to be police officers, wanting to think the world's good, and then eventually you got to have this uncomfortable conversation. And as you're having this uncomfortable conversation, the mental state is, how much damage am I doing to my child by even having this conversation at a young age? And when is the proper time to have this conversation? And those are the pains that we go through every day, is when and what's the result of this conversation. And ultimately, the conversation you're having could be saving that child's life.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Luther, for reminding us that even while we gather tonight to think perhaps particularly about Black men, the truth is that violence is being perpetrated against all people of color, and against Black women, against lesbian and gay Black persons. And some of the most vulnerable are transgender Black women. And we need to name that.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I really appreciate you putting that before us. And I appreciate all of you, and Abe, you for prompting it, to name how what's deadly here is not just a bullet. It's everything, even to the very conversation and the stress and the anxiety that is designed to try to protect you and your children and your loved ones. It itself is deadly. Talking about that conversation and why it's so necessary, what role do both conscious and unconscious biases play in the perceptions of, and reactions to, Black men, and you could expand that broader if you wish, to people in color in general, locally and nationally? So you could think about your local context, whether it's here in Auburn or New York City, or nationwide. So, that's sort of a theoretical question, but then also, how have you yourself, if you care to share, experienced these biases personally?
Well, I was out to the mall one time, and I was just browsing around, and the only one in the store was myself and the person that worked there. So as I started going from rack to rack, I noticed as I got back to the back of the store that she was right there at the next rack, every rack I went to. So I made my way all the way to the back, and I was looking to the front, and I said, "Oh my God, did you see that guy just steal 5 leather jackets?" So she went flying to the front of the store. She's counting all the leather jackets, and I'm on my way out of the store. She said, sir, please stop. Can you identify the guy that took all the 5 coats? Now, here's what I realized when I walked in the store. The coats had the wire security thing on it. All right, so there's no way they could have taken the coats if they wanted to, but she just thought that all these coats were gone on her watch. And I turned around and I remember saying to her, well, ma'am, if you weren't so busy watching me and watching your store, those 5 leather jackets wouldn't have left your store. And I just simply walked out.
That's nice.
I had experience the other day at a drive-through bank. And I think we all heard about the stories when you're walking up to a store and somebody locks the doors as a Black male or Black female walks by. I was in the bank side by side where they had the little tubes. They send them messages back and forth with money. And the lady looked over at me and she rolled up her window on my side and locked the door. And I said, this can't be real, right? And then, I just noticed that she was like rolling her, like she looked timid. Unfortunately, and with what's been going on and with these type of discussions, I kind of lost my cool. I said, did you lock your door? When I said, did you lock your door? Did you think she sped her tires in fear and rode off. And, it was a, I'm vulnerable. I'll be vulnerable for a minute. It angered me. But after a while, it hurt my feelings. I'm thinking to myself, I can't even be next to you in a car and you think that you're not safe. And I'm not going to allow people to get off the hook and say they put these bad images that's on TV. And I think that is true, but I don't think it's as much as it has been in the past. I think this comes from us not realizing how far apart we really are and using that as an excuse.
Recently, I stayed for a couple of months at a coworker's house. They had a guest room. So of course, it was a new face in the building. It was an apartment building, mixed culturally, thanks to gentrification, of course. But every day, you know, when I would go in, you know, I had a key. At first I didn't have a key, but you know, the people who lived there would stop and they would say, you know, oh, you live here? I was like, yeah, you know, I live at such and such's apartment. They're like, oh, we know her, whatever, cool. And I didn't think anything of it. I was coming out the elevator one of those days, and a white couple stopped, like, hey, how are you doing? I was like, oh, how are you doing? And I kept walking. I was like, we haven't seen you here before. And I was like, oh yeah, I live with such and such. Like, oh, okay, cool. And then as I was leaving my last day there, I would pass some of the black people who lived in the building, and they were like, hey, hi, and shake hands. They would nod, they would greet me, and never asked me whether or not I belonged in the building. And that's when it occurred to me, like a real flash of all those moments, that, hold on, I've never seen these black people either. They don't know me. Why is it that they smile when they see me? They're not asking me if I belong here, and only was the white people who asked me if I belonged here. So clearly, what I had even, you know, passed off as a natural inclination was not a universal situation. It was, for some reason, you know, I looked, you know, like a threat or didn't belong to them, but clearly it wasn't me, right? You know, so it must be them, which is crazy. Even for a moment for me to think, oh man, if I had my suit on, then they wouldn't ask me, you know? And that goes back to that whole anxiety thing. Like, how do we have to reshape ourselves and make ourselves uncomfortable and fit into different shapes so that we don't make other people scared? You know, for me, there's nothing scarier to me than a white person scared of me, you know, because that means that might be my last moment, and it'll be okay.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've all said one, but there's just like so many. There's too many to count. I guess like spanning from like micro to macro. Yeah, I mean, I used to be a nanny, like a male nanny for like little white kids, and I would walk into a building to go pick them up. Security guards would be like, "Who are you?" And be like, "I work here." They're like, "No, you don't." And I'm like, "All right, call." There will be a young white, like 9-year-old little white guy who will affirm to you of my reason for being here. So if that's what you want to do, there's been times I've been in stores where people will check me randomly. I've been on spring break. I was in a club. A white photographer wanted to take a photo of me. I said no. He kept trying to talk to me. I said no. He went and got a security guard. Security guard brought me out and said, if you keep talking, I'm gonna put you in handcuffs. Like, things like that have happened, and they can, you know, at this point, it's just who you are. I do think that these microaggressions, these macroaggressions, these biases, I think are important, whether they're conscious or unconscious, because of who's in power right now. You know what I mean? Where it's like the current race in power, white people, hold these biases, conscious or unconscious, and they make laws and they make policies, and they make those laws and policies with those biases in mind. And they continue to do it so that this thing doesn't become an individual thing, it becomes a systemic thing. You know what I mean? And I think that's like, it's easy for us to be like, why are white people, like, why are they always thinking like there's nothing wrong? It's because, like, legally there isn't, and there haven't been. You know what I mean? Like, redlining was legal. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's, you know, locally microaggressions, nationally it's policy, Democratic and Republican. So and we get that too. So
Yeah, my son was out to a movie one time with his friends, and the usher was trying to escort them out of the building because they claimed that they were making a lot of noise. So my son calls me, and I rushed out there to find that the person that's making this complaint is intoxicated, right? And my son said this guy has been harassing him through the whole movie, but the usher didn't want to hear that from my son and his friends. So they figured it would be the best thing to do is just put these kids out of the theater. So I said to them, I said, well, no, that won't happen. If you're going to do that, just give me my money back and I'll take them all out, because their safety now is at risk here.
Thank you for sharing those stories. Do any of you want to say anything else about bias?
I mean, I will say, you know, there's sometimes, I mean, we all know about the obviously negative biases in media, but sometimes I think about the not so obvious and very subtextual that come off okay until you really think about what happens. You know, we all could think of a scene in any movie where, you know, someone, one car hits another car, and the person who gets out of the car that got hit is some big black guy, and he might end up being, you know, friendly, but we all have that moment of uh-oh. And the other day I was thinking about it, and I was like, but doesn't that perpetuate the whole idea of black being scary, right? It was funny in that comedy, but it's subconsciously, you know, reinforcing those images and those concerns, so that's how we're approached, and it's supported. You know, I think it's important that we really think about those things, because it's a well-meaning, funny situation on TV, right? But what is it really, you know, setting in our minds? You know, how is our worldview being painted and reinforced by those type of things?
Yeah, like how are we being dehumanized over and over again in our media, in our own brains, like consciously, unconsciously? Like how do we see ourselves as less than? How do people perceive us as monsters or like invincible, or you know, sexually aggressive or built for certain tasks? Like how does our humanity get shaved away bit by bit, so that people keep thinking that it's okay to kill us because we're not human? So yeah.
I saw. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Good. You good?
I was saying I saw a video, and it was funny. It was a video of this woman who was being stopped by a cop for like something minute, and she, you know, drove off and was like, "No, you're not gonna arrest me," and they ended up tasing her, and it was funny until it occurred to me, they tased her, right? Why are we being tased? You know what I'm saying? Like all the situations where black men gets killed unarmed, they could have used a taser, right? So it's just like you start really like paying attention to just certain things. It's like I was supposed to laugh at this thing because it's supposed to be funny, but it just made me really think about how dark our reality is.
And I also saw a video of a white woman getting out of her car and is screaming at the police officer, telling him that what's your name? You know, I'm gonna have your job. I mean, just screaming. And I'm looking at that situation, and I'm saying that couldn't have been a black woman. You know what I mean? That could not have been a black woman that had gotten out of her car. Just getting out of her car, she would have been on the ground in a handcuff. But this woman got out of her car, got in the cop's face, and is screaming at him for at least 5 minutes. And I'm looking at this video like, wow, that could not have been a black woman getting out of a car doing that. She wouldn't have stood a chance. She would have been tased.
You have to see the world with a different lens from this side of the world. You know, from being a minority, black, you gotta have a different lens on. And these micro messages and microaggressions take a toll on you mentally. You know, I wear a suit. I have to, right? And I feel like people take me more serious if I do. I don't like it when I hear little subliminal messages like, "What's up, man?" and we're in a business meeting, or somebody trying to give me a high five or something like that to bond with me. Very offensive. You just got to see the world differently. And the other thing is, it's almost a situation where you got friends in your life that you accept for their flaws. Like you might have a friend that you have to deal with. I don't like to accept, but that maybe doesn't pay you back on time if you lend them money, or always late to showing up. We have to exist in this world, so we have to look at all these microaggressions, all these micro biases, and not accept them, but live within those frames. And it's very difficult. And what it does to a person's soul mentally and what it does to your psychological and your spirit, it can take a toll on you.
You know, when we say Black Lives Matter, we don't mean that no other life matters, because you show us every day that your life matters. You show us in our educational textbooks where we search to find our history that is not there. You show us in politics all the time that you use us to get votes. And it's code language like, I'm going to clean up the streets. That means I'm going to take all the Black people off the street so you could be safe. I mean, those are the hidden messages that we see on TV. But all we want to do is be seen. We want our even slice of the pie, and we deserve no less.
You know,
Before we leave this, I just wanted to point out, you know, of course, in New York City, we having a problem, which we're addressing now, of just how people are being policed in terms of social distancing and masks. I mean, we got people in Central Park and downtown, you know, white people just chilling in the park, and police are handing them masks. We got a woman who got dragged in the street in front of her child by 6 police officers because her mask wasn't on her mouth. That's ridiculous. You know, it's crazy that, you know, every day we just see how differently we're treated. Like the fact that people are giving out masks, I mean, that's even an opportunity. You know, what was it? Something like all but like 40 out of 60 of stops and summonses off of, you know, not being social distancing and wearing masks were all Black and brown people in New York City, which is, you know, we're called minority for a reason, right? So shouldn't we be the minority of these, you know, problematic situations? But we're absolutely not. We are, you know, majority seems like an understatement when you look at the numbers. It's ridiculous.
Tracy, to your statement about Black Lives Matter, I want to say amen. And I think that is the perfect segue to our next question, because it's a question about how do we make in policy and in practice Black lives indeed matter. What needs to happen in our community and nation? So you could think about here in Auburn, New York City, or broader. What needs to happen to ensure that Black sons, and again, you can think broader than that as well, to all people of color. What needs to happen to ensure that Black sons are physically, mentally, and spiritually safe?
Well, Patrick, I would start by saying this. We need more people like you and our white counterparts that we have as friends. Like I could call my friends and they'll be here today. You know what I mean? But we need you guys to sit down and have this conversation extensively, locally and nationally. Because by us having the conversation doesn't move anything, all right? Because remember, we're like invisible to white society. So when they deem us invisible, they don't really open their ears until somebody that looks like them is having this conversation, all right? So we can have the conversation all we want. And this is what we do. We just wait for the next news cycle to come through to see what's going to happen. So it's going to be people like you and our white Caucasian friends to sit down and have this conversation with their friends that are probably not, you know, as open as they are. But that's what has to happen in order for our kids to be safe. That people like you and our white friends, and they have to have this conversation. And I also believe it has to start from the top down, because when you have the person that's in the White House right now who perpetuates racism on a daily basis and just gives free reign for everybody to act like that, that's where it has to start.
Yeah, there's this quote, America is so racist that when you protest racism, you think you're protesting America. You know, but to that end, you know, but I agree with Tracy about, you know, a lot of it, I mean, not all of it, but a lot of it is about mobilizing, you know, our supportive actual ally white counterparts. You know, you hear about things like white privilege, but he's also talk about, male privilege, for example, right? And I've always, agreed with the concept that it exists. But it never really occurred to me until kind of recently where, sometimes, I work in a public office, and sometimes we'll have constituents that are not necessarily the most respectful. And I don't deal with constituents. I'm communications. I don't deal directly in that sense. So, one time I heard a colleague of mine, a young lady, and I heard someone yelling at her, which is not acceptable. But I knew that she was really trying to help him, and I went out because although I don't really deal with constituents, I'm not going to just sit and listen to one of my colleagues being disrespected. And I just stood there, right? And I am a short man, I'm not like big or anything, but I just stood there, and the guy calmed down and started speaking to me, and I was able to get the questions. And then I said, I'm not here to help you, right? Why are you treating this woman who's trying to help you in this way? Another colleague of mine was walking in the street, and she stopped me while I was walking past her, and she said, hey, there's a guy following me. Just look out. So I let her keep walking, and I followed, and I saw the guy follow, and I eventually caught up with her, and the man was yelling at her, and he was yelling at him to leave her alone. And I stepped up in front of her protectively, and he calmed down and started talking to me. And she looked at me and she said, no, don't talk to him, because she didn't want to talk to me, right? And I really started to realize there's an innate privilege I have that I'm being respected in this way. And I use those examples to say, white people have that same thing, right? And it's an innate, unearned, it's not a negative thing, but it is a privilege. So much like, in my situations, I had to step back and ask these young ladies, how do you want me to help you, right? How can I help you? How can I be of support? And whatever that answer was, kind of like roll with it. Do I need to just stand here by you while you handle your business, while you have these conversations? There's a white man in my office. I love him. He's really good at, if, someone is, he's in a room and someone addressing him instead of the black female chief of staff, he will readdress it. Well, this person has the answer, right? As opposed, so he's being aware of it. It's not even a big thing, right? But just pivoting, the attention where it needs to go, So if a white person would have said something like, or I'm sure some of them did, like, the kneeling is not a protest of the flag, it's protesting people being killed. Let's bring it back to what the attention is. Listen to him. I don't need to speak. I mean, it's really what you're doing right here, though, right? Because I don't need to speak. Listen to these people, and that's a big part of it. The rest of it, on our end, I feel like, as we spoke about here, we're just so exhausted. I one day, when I first, I don't even know who got killed, but in my street, they were protesting, the murder of another black man, and I was going to get ready to go. And my wife at the time said, no, you can't, because if something happens to you, our kids, so then you just get exhausted that you can't even defend yourself because you're going to die for defending yourself. It's just so then it becomes a question of, we as black people, though, do need to not get upset with each other about how we deal with it. And I think that's one of the things that happens, right? Oh, you're not out here protesting. No, I'm not. I commend you for doing it. But it's just so much.
I think Abe had the quote yesterday that I'm gonna let him do it, that we were all waiting for last night.
Oh.
That was the quote of a lifetime, man.
Yeah, you have to say it, Abe.
Oh, man.
You got us all laughing at a serious subject here, just for time to give us that quote, man.
Talk about being put on the spot.
Yeah, what is this? Why? No, I just think, it's a big question, man. How to fix racism. But I did say, just in the vein that all of us are tired, I think you could tell pretty easily. But again, and I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, because yeah, we do want to talk about issues. Yeah, we do want to let people understand, our white people understand our perspective, to see the difficulties in just being Black, but it's also not our jobs to educate you. It's not every time you have a question about how we need to be treated better, it's not my job to tell you. I'm not like your magical Negro. I'm not your, you know what I mean? I'm not your Morgan Freeman, bro. Like, the information is out there. You know what I'm saying? So if you truly, and like, I guess that's part of it also, is like, there are white people who mean well and are not actively racist, but there are also a lot of those same people who like patting themselves on the back for not being actively racist. It's like, at this point, that's not enough. You can't just be like, yeah, I'm not actively racist, so I'm good, right? It's like, no, like Luther was saying, use your privilege to affect change. Risk some stuff, risk losing your position socially, risk maybe losing your job. Like, and that's the thing with privilege, is it's about the fact that you don't have to risk anything. The privilege is that there's no risk for you being inactive. Like, you get to continue being a person without having to look down. I mean, I think like another thing is we need more people of color in office. We need more people of color creating policy that reflect our humanity. We need, I mean, I think we, especially like Black women in office, desperately, because they're, you know, we're not a monolith, but I mean, they're better than us. And you know, I think there's also a need for empathy, on account of people in places of privilege to, although you've been taught not to see us as human, to understand and know that we are, and to recognize that at this point in time, we haven't been historically been treated like human beings, and to have empathy and to have those hard conversations, like Tracy was saying, with white people, you know, that is a form of sacrifice. That's a form of risk. Like, you could get yelled at by your white homies. Like, that's the thing you're risking, but it will benefit us. And that's like just day-to-day stuff. But, you know, again, representation in politics is huge as well.
I'll tell you, there's more white people that are not than there is. And one mistake that people that live actively in their white privilege that are racist make a mistake is they believe that all white people agree with them. And you guys have been in those rooms by yourself and had conversations, and that is your moment to say, I'm not feeling that. That is wrong. So that, you know, the one thing that, like, I'll tell you is that that's a mistake. Somebody told me that, and it has stuck with me. That's the biggest mistake, is that they all believe that all the other white people agree with them. So when you have those moments, it's your time to be our advocate, because we're gonna need you in that room to make a difference.
You know, it's as simple as just treat us the way we treat you. I mean, it's that simple when it comes down to, if you're, you know, I don't even have to wonder who you are or what you are, but good morning. When you say good morning to somebody and they just turn around and look at you like, you know, and they walk a little faster, it's like, wow. I mean, I can't even say good morning to you without you being threatened. But it's as simple as just treat somebody the way you want to be treated.
Thank you. And to your point, I mean, I didn't feel any sense of risk in either last week's or this week's conversation. For me personally, I know some of my colleagues did last week, and part of that's being a pastor, so I'm expected to say things that sometimes upset people. But also it's that privilege. I didn't feel that risk, and the way that you may have tonight, and the way that you do every time.
Hey, Pastor, let me say something too. This conversation, having us four guys on, did not come with any risk. You know, it came with risk on our ends, at least on my end. You know, being in the business community, you know, and you know, most of my customers are white, you know, and And I was, people were just kind of like, you really want to be on that? That could be bad for business. So we all have stuck our necks out. And you know what? Is that important to us that we're going to have this conversation? And I'm sure it's going to get a lot of views. And we're all out there. And I'm pretty sure Tracy and Abe and Luther have had the same type of rest, that, nervousness a little bit, apprehension about doing this type of, maybe not Luther. You got this.
No. You know what? You know what's funny? I had a moment like that. It wasn't this. It's not this moment, but so I mentioned a song I wrote, and literally there's a line. The line goes, nothing scarier to me than white people scared of me. And I performed it for the New York City Marathon, and I edited myself out. I at the last moment I just said nothing scarier to me than people scared of me, because in my mind I was like, oh wait, I don't want to offend all these people who might support me, et cetera, et cetera. But the funny thing is, my daughter said, why did you not say the white person part? And I was like, crap, that's crazy. But it happens. It happens for all of us, and it happens just like this, so we don't even think about it. Like at that moment in my head, I'm like, damn, I really just cut that part out, because there is a risk of offending people who you might need to be allies, which we shouldn't be the case, right? If you're an ally, you take the hard truths, and you don't take it personal. You just see what you can do to help.
You're right, because what happens is that when we have when we're invited to have the conversation on race, then they reverse it. It's like, oh, did you see him say all those racist stuff and on the podcast the other day? I mean, we're having a conversation on race. I said, so there's a lot of risk that comes with that, because they think of us the way they think of us to begin with, and to them this just adds fuel to the fire. It gives them a false sense of, okay, making themselves right about what they already felt about us.
And we're not talking about all white people, of course. What we're talking about is the ones that feel safe and not having those conversations. Those are the ones that I found. If you got somebody that's off the reservation that's really racist, that is really, you can't fix that, okay? But I think the people that get offended are the people that have been there and haven't advocated for us, that have been in those rooms or been in a situation where they thought they could have done more. So when they hear this conversation, if they're in the middle and they're nervous, they're uncomfortable, they're offensive, and the energy comes back to us. And the problem with us is we don't know who we're talking to. We don't know our audience. So if I'm talking to you as a friend, as a friend or as a person that's trying to give you knowledge about this, I don't know what level you're viewing the world in your lens. So it's hard for us to have that conversation, because the conversation alone is awkward because we don't know where you stand. If it's somebody that is a total racist and a bigot, it's easy not to have that conversation because there's no conversation to be had. But we don't know who we're talking to. We don't know our audience.
But also, it's important to have the conversation, although we're all exhausted from having the conversation, because if it makes my children and my grandchildren a little safer, you know what I mean? It's worth having the conversation for me to get on here and explain our experiences to our white counterparts, because frankly, it's the fear of unknown. It's just what they've been taken in. First of all, it's what's been taught to them about us. And then it's what they see on TV because everything on the news is like, anytime there's a drug bust, it's like only black people do drugs. You know what I mean? Anytime there's a welfare bust, it's only black people that are on welfare. You know what I mean? And this is what they think. If you ask them the percentage of people on welfare, they'll be quick to tell you it's people of color. And that's not true.
It's not the case. The other thing was having this conversation with children. Here's what happens when you're growing up in in Auburn. You know, we are a small percentage of the population, and there's no neighborhood is one dominant race in any area. So we grow up pretty much integrated, right? We grow up in our neighbors, and you know, and the problem having to come with the kids is that growing up in Auburn, you grow up loving everybody, you can play with everybody, everybody's your friend, and then one day you find out their parents or they have views about you, and that type of emotional hurt is different, because now this person has become my friend, and they really think this way about me. And I saw more of that since this current presidency than ever. And as they find out that is the person that feels different about you, now you're insecure in who else feels that way. And that becomes a thing that you don't even know how to deal with, because there's so many that you have to interact every day. How do you function in that world? And you just don't know the truth at every single moment.
I think in many ways you've already answered our final question for this evening, but I'm going to put it to you in case there's a part of this answer that still needs to be spoken. In The Soul of Black Folks, W.E. Du Bois in 1933 states that the greatest ill of American society will always be sickness of race. In less than 13 years, that text will be 100 years old. And we're still there. So, and as I said, you've already answered this in many ways, but are there any additional things that you wish to say to this question? What is it that you are calling on white Americans or Americans in general to do to address this illness that plagues our nation?
Well, Patrick, I'll just reiterate what I said before, because I think it's important. I just think it's important for our white friends and our white allies to continue to have the conversation, because that's when the needle's going to move. You know what I mean? That's when it's going to move for us. And if they trust us as their friends, they will defend us as their friends.
Yeah, I would really simplify it specifically also to ask, and I kind of said it before, but ask us how you can help, and then do that. Do not tell us what we need to do. Do not tell us how you're going to help without first asking what is the type of help that we need. And don't assume that we're helpless, right? We got a lot of stuff going for us. If we didn't, people wouldn't be trying to stop it, right? So just ask how you can help, and then do that thing.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, man. I think, yeah, we talked about it. Empathy. We've talked about seeing us, making efforts to see us as humans. I think that's, it's like been a 400-year systematic dismantling of this idea as Black and brown people as people. Whiteness is the default in the media, in our policies. To have the empathy to view someone who doesn't look like you as a human being seems simple, but when you're not incentivized to do it, and in fact you have things to gain by actively ignoring that, it's incredibly difficult. So like, the ill is deep, runs deep in even our psychology. I think, I guess white people, cool white people watching this, and hopefully white people just who are receptive, like, believe us when we say what we're saying. Like, believe us when we say we're hurting, because we're not doing it to trick you. We're not doing it to like get an advantage. We're doing it because it's happening. Like, trust us that one human being is suffering, and that maybe not directly you, but the systems your people have perpetuated continue to cause us death, you know? And then I guess hopefully that idea can help people understand that we haven't been treated like people. And in order to fix that, we need to become rehumanized in the eyes of America. And that's not going to happen tomorrow, but, you know, I think maybe conversations like this could help.
Well, I would say, you know, and I'm not being insensitive to COVID-19 or nothing, but if we think about how much energy went into stopping this virus, think about that for a minute. Think about they shut the American economy down to stop this virus. There's power. There's power in those rooms that can make a difference. And believe us. And listen to what we say. This is bothering us. We're part of you. We're together in this. And be brave enough to stop a casual conversation among friends that say you shouldn't be saying that, and not in my house will you be using that type of language. Not in my presence will you be talking about people you don't know. We have to put the ball in your court because our fight doesn't work alone. Our message does not get heard in those private conversations. Our dignity is not carried out. There's more of you, good white people, and I'm not saying, I say that broadly, than the few minds. It's just that we need those people in the middle to speak up and shut it down. So just believe us.
Brian, that hit me hard, what you just said powerfully. I mean, that analogy to the resources, the sheer staggering number of resources and leadership that has been marshaled to try to contain this virus, COVID-19, and keep people safe, compared to the lack of response at policy level, at leadership level, down to individual level, in response to the virus of hate and white supremacy and violence that is claiming the lives of people of color, particularly Black men and women in our nation. That is a powerful analogy, and we also have read many articles and journalism documenting the disproportionate and unjust effect of COVID-19 on people of color and lack of access to resources and vulnerabilities as well.
Hey, can I say one thing?
Please, Abe, please.
I think as important as it is to talk about how we can protect our Black boys in this country, I think it's equally important to talk about how we need to protect the lives of Black and brown women or non-binary people in this country who are doubly targeted by not only the systemic racism and interpersonal racism we experience, but the interpersonal gender violence and misogyny and misogynoir especially. I think that's as important. I don't know if y'all have like a conversation with Black women specifically talking about this stuff, but I did want to make sure that at least in this conversation, we discuss that is as important to protect them and make sure to protect them. And that's on us, like not just, I guess it is on Black men, but it is also on men to apply these same values that we talked about to protecting Black and brown women, non-binary folks in America, because they're more vulnerable. Like we are, like Black guys are like the white people of Black people. You know what I mean? Like we have the most privilege of Black and brown people. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so again, like it's also our job to use these values in these conversations and put our privilege at risk to protect those people also. And that's not easy. So, but we're asking white people to do it, so we have to do it too.
Abe, you're absolutely right. Because we are all in this together, and what happens to one happens to all. And we just got to keep that in our forefront at all times. And we have to protect our women and our children.
Yeah, Black women were in the forefront of civil rights movements and all that. We definitely have to always keep that bell ringing.
And Abe, thank you for that reminder. In fact, this whole event happening tonight, what happened last week, what will happen next week, is the result of women, particularly Black women, who dreamed this, who structured this, who authored the questions. So all that's happening right now is the result of their creativity, their bravery, their power. And I know, and Tracy, you know this because you're married to one to one of those women, that those women are having this conversation in our community and are boldly leading. But it's so important that in every space we have this reminder. And Abe, I'm so grateful to you for giving it to us and to remind us of those intersectionalities as well, of gender identity and sexuality and citizenship and all the different forms of marginalization that can combine to become deadly for different siblings of ours in our community.
Well, you know, and also, Pastor, thank you and the three other gentlemen that were brave enough to join in this discussion and even want to have this discussion. So, you know, the bravery is with you guys as well. Thank you.
And I also like to thank Angela and the Auburn Public Theater, Gwen and Melanie, for hosting this. And it's not an easy conversation to have, but it needed to be had. And you all are brave for putting this together.
With that, are there any final words that you wish to offer tonight before we close out?
One thing I always say at my my open mic, and I guess this is really to all the Black people, you know, when we wrap up intense conversations like this, I always want to remind people, you know, at the Harlem Bomb Shelter, quick plug, but seriously though, I always like to remind people that when we're fighting for our Black lives, we have to remember to take time to live them. We're fighting so we can enjoy it, we can enjoy the art, we can enjoy the culture, and we need to take those times to actually do that.
Wow.
Abe, Brian, or Tracy, any final words for us this evening?
I think Luther said it all.
I know that spoke.
Yeah, like, I think he dropped the microphone.
I agree. Well, I do wish, and echoing you, Brian, and echoing you, Tracy, to offer thanks for those who made tonight possible. And that starts with the four of you. And it really has been an honor for me, and I hope for those who are watching, to stand beside you in this conversation, to listen, to share in your truths tonight and the words that you needed to offer to our nation and to our community. And I'm so grateful. I mean, you have said, and so many others have said, how exhausting these conversations are, and how exhausted you are. And yet here you are, giving yet more of yourself, being vulnerable, taking risks. Brian, you talked about how, you know, this, as a businessman, this could be a risk. And those of you may feel that way as well. And I'm grateful to have shared in this with you, to have been given a glimpse of you and of the systemic biases and injustices and pain and exhaustion that are daily a reality for our Black and Brown neighbors. And I also want to thank, and I want to name them because names are important. I want to thank the Harriet Tubman Troupe, and I want to thank specifically the Black women and mothers who made tonight possible. Gwen Weber McLeod, Dr. Rhoda Overstreet Wilson, Dr. Johanna Rogers, and Melody Smith Johnson. And I do want to thank Angela Dadabo and Auburn Public Theater and Carrie Idle, who's running our tech behind the scenes. And I want to thank everyone who is watching. And If you are white and you're watching, then I hope that you play this over and over again, and that you listen to this, and that you listen to the calls that have been issued to us to step up. You know, I really, Tracy, your statement about we need to be in community with one another, because that's when we cultivate friendship, that's when we stand by each other. And I think that is so profound, that when we know each other, as we've done tonight a little bit, when we know each other, we care about each other. And when we care about each other, we stand up for each other. And that's what we need. And at the same time, I hope, if you're white and you're watching and you've been hearing the statements, the expressions of exhaustion, there are a lot of good books and articles and videos like this one out there. You don't need to immediately go and ask every Black friend that you have to solve this for you, though we do need to take our cues, as Luther said, and we need to be directed, but go do your own education, learn this for yourself. There's some fantastic resources out there, and maybe we will try to make those available through Auburn Public Theater going forward. Please join us next week when we bring the group last week, the white men, together from that panel, and tonight's panelists together to continue this conversation. And we'll see what conversations and what actions and what friendships are sparked from that. Gentlemen, thank you. And to all those who are watching, I wish you a good night. May you hold on to this, because you've been given a precious gift tonight. May you treat it with care, and may you go forth and tell others and do something about it. Because tonight, as we did last week, we say his name, Ahmaud Arbery. And we say all the other names, the too many names that have been claimed by the violence of white supremacy. Good night. We'll see you next week.